People throughout the organization have all kinds of expertise, but it's hidden. The problem is we have to be continually learning, right? One of the keys is the social connection. How do we get people to want to come in? Because Friday is fourth place day. The fourth place, we've created this continuous learning hub. Is not just about knowledge or training, but it's about social connection. In a virtual environment, it's an unlimited shelf space. We've got all this knowledge nobody knows about in a company. So you've got all these elements you can play with in there, and you bring them together. This is a mashup, a marketplace software, supply and demand, where all you have to do is search. You spend time with me, so we're also building social capital. All of these things bring us together to build something, to create something together, to learn something. Talk about it, you share some stories, you give me the roadmap and the guide and all this stuff. I'm a hero coming home. And he was willing to take a risk, to trust that if we structure this right and get people researching these elements together, and we keep bringing back what we're learning, and we're learning together, we're building alignment, we'll test it. That is the process.
And we've been asking ourselves for some time now, what is the future of work and the workplace? And now another question sits beside it. How does AI change the way we work and the environments that support it? What if the next evolution isn't an office, but something different? A place where learning, creativity, mentorship, and curiosity all intersect, where AI meets human wisdom, a place people go because they want to. Imagine walking into a space that feels part cafe, part makerspace, and part Apple Genius Bar, a place intentionally designed for collisions, connections, and unlocking hidden skills inside of an organization. Welcome to What the F is Happening to the Office, where we explore how work, the workplace, and the world around us are evolving. Hi, I'm Bob Fox, founder of Work Design, and in each episode, we talk with the experts shaping the future of work, innovators who are redefining how and where we work. If you're curious about where the workplace is heading or involved in creating high-performing and healthy environments, then you're in the right place. Subscribe, comment, and share these insights with others who are interested. Today, I'm joined by Rex Miller. For more than 2 decades, Rex has worked with Fortune 500 leaders, educators, and innovators to explore what becomes possible when curiosity, courage, and connection drive how we work. He's a futurist, researcher, and executive coach, and his work, including Genius Spark and Mindshift, helps unlock valuable human potential. He's the author of 6 books, including Change Your Space, Change Your Culture, and The Healthy Workplace Nudge, and he's spoken on some of the most influential stages in the workplace industry. And today we're diving into one of his most forward-thinking and compelling ideas yet, a new way to think about work, AI, and the environments where they converge. It's a concept he calls the fourth place. Rex, welcome.
Yes, thank you, Bob. And just for some context, I'm in my cottage, and when I leave town, the crows think they own this area, so you may hear some crows in the background on the property here.
Good. Well, before we begin, give us some context. How did you come up with the fourth place, and what are some of the things that shaped that thinking?
Well, I'm going to go back to college briefly because my major then was on what we call social technology. And so it was a bit of communications and technology, looking at how when the dominant platform of communication changes, everything changes. Our sense of time and space, our relationships, the organizations that facilitate that. A good quote, Michael Schrag, one of my favorite writers, said, "History is a succession of new media toppling old empires by repatterning time and space." So I've kept that theme throughout, and you've seen in some of my books, the education books, I have this matrix looking at how does print shape us differently than broadcast, than digital, and we're developing it for the social mobile and the AI. It really changes our brain wiring. And there's an incredible video, it's probably 10 years old now, that I played at the recent Cornet session of an infant with an iPad and playing with the iPad, and then she's given some magazines, and she's trying to push with her finger the magazines, and she's getting frustrated, and she expresses the frustration, and the mother, the text says that a magazine is an iPad that's broken, basically, in her mind. And the point is that Steve Jobs has forever changed her expectations and how the world should work, that the world should respond instantly to my gestures and touch. And that won't go away. So in the workplace, we've got this theory, generations theory, that was developed before digital technology. And it's based on that generations grow and are shaped by historical events. But more than that, media rewires us more than social events. I grew up when I watched men walk on the moon in 1969. But my growing up with television had more to impact the way I look at the world and my expectations of how the world works and relationships, more than a few of those events. Just like my son, who grew up with video gaming and social media, that's impacted it more than him growing up with 9/11. And I think in the workplace, we've got a couple things we need to consider. One, we've got these media platform cohorts. And, we've used the word digital natives, but my first language is broadcast. That's what I grew up with. My second language is print because that's what I learned in school. And then I've acquired, and just because of the way I'm wired, to try to keep up with what we call the social technology, the behaviors and the use of these new technologies, and not fall into expecting websites to function like magazines. And that was the big problem we had when we were moving into the new world of Web 1.0, is that they weren't interactive. Understanding what's underneath these technologies, like a hammer, for example, it's real simple. You hammer, but if you try to use it as a paintbrush or you use it as a screwdriver, it doesn't work. So looking at the workplace, we've got people who have grown up with a tool of communication that they're native in, and we've got to learn how to bridge those or leverage those different kinds of ways of interacting, so that the conflicts that we oftentimes experience and the comments we make about certain generations, they become polarizing. And it's really looking at, well, this person grew up in France and this person grew up in England. So let's look at those differences, the language differences, the media language differences, rather than this is good and that's bad.
Well, I think what you're describing is, we've got work, we've got technology and the culture, and all of that is changing constantly. And that change is probably increasing. It's getting faster and faster.
Yes.
So, how do we describe this particular moment that we're in, and how are organizations perceiving or thriving in that kind of an environment?
Kodak is a good example, right? Kodak grew up in this industrial era, which, by the way, is kind of a print model where you have hierarchy in departments and a linear process of creating whatever you create. And they create digital cameras in 1975. That didn't make sense. The quality wasn't great, but they didn't understand that underneath it is Moore's law, that every 18 months, the computing power is doubling in capacity. And so you just play that out over time. By 1992, it was good enough for the first consumer camera. Casio was the first consumer camera. It was $900, but it was game over because they had been going through the iterations every 18 months, getting better and better and better. So you start with, 8 pixels year one, and then 2 years later it's 16, and then 2 years later it's 32, and it just keeps going and going and going like that until it becomes viable. Ray Kurzweil developed a curve based on Moore's law on when technologies would converge and transform industries. So he predicted the downfall of the mainframe, the birth of the personal computer, smartphones, and he's taken that curve all the way out to something he calls the singularity, when human capacity and technology merge where you can't tell the difference. He said that by 2023, now remember, this is something he developed 30 years ago. Gordon Moore developed Moore's Law in 1964. Well, he predicted that in 2023 that computing technology would be equivalent to the human brain, to a single person. Well, we've surpassed that. So we're even beyond that. So we have to keep looking at, as things get smarter and technology gets smaller and easy to converge, we're looking at health breakthroughs that are incredibly coming. Dr. Roizen a few years ago wrote the book, The Great Age Reboot, and I spent 2 days with him back in 2017 where he scared the living daylights out of me in terms of how chronic illness would bankrupt our company, but at the same time said there are 14 converging health technologies that will transform everything. And what did we see last year? Ozempic, GLP drugs. Now, there are some pretty nasty shadow sides to that drug. If you take it and don't change your lifestyle habits, and stop taking it, it's got the worst of all worlds in it, but it's a miraculous drug. And it's not only going to change healthcare, but it's going to change food and it's going to change pharma. So it's going to have this rippling effect. So that's my analogy of what we're beginning to see in all areas, is that we've got these new capabilities. Just look at, we're at this early stage of AI. And I did a workshop this last week with a construction firm on strategic planning. And I have some exercises and I recorded them through audio and I took pictures of things. And the recap would normally take me about 3 days to go through all of this and recap it and put it in this format that creates a roadmap. Here's where we go. Well, I get back to the hotel room and I said, well, I'll just start taking the audio and upload it into Descript and clean it up and then take the copy and put it into ChatGPT with some parameters. This is what I want you to create out of it. And then upload the photos of the large sticky notes and let ChatGPT know that these are related. Less than an hour, I have a full recap of the workshop and all the exercises and a roadmap related to their strategic priorities. And then I thought, draft an email for me from the president of this division to the CEO on that he can send to the CEO to give an update on what they did and what they accomplished. This would take me 3 or 4 days and it would totally drain me in doing it. It's just lots of detail and stuff like that. And of course, I read through it and I cleaned it up and I made the context specific, but I saved 3 days of time and those are billable, right? In the real world. So this is what we're starting to see in the white collar world, the explosion of this new technology. And we haven't even addressed the robot side of things, not the humanoid robots, but the drone robots and all the intelligence that we're going to be gathering in the driving robots and all of that stuff. It's going to explode. And it is. It's already exploding.
Your Kodak example is interesting for me because I think one of the challenges that we have is that we get these new technologies and it's very difficult to look into the future and see what that's going to bring. We can look in the past and we see all the rapid change that's occurred. But when we look forward, we don't see that. And so organizations, how do they embrace this? There's a risk that they have to take because they don't know what the future is going to bring.
So here's the basic rule. If you look at the shift in the communication platform, let's look at just print to broadcast. Well, what print rewarded is expertise and intellectual property, right? It rewards that. And then we move to broadcast. Well, what does broadcast reward? What does it value most? Presence, telepresence. And so going back in time to give people context, when Nixon and Kennedy did the first presidential debate in television, people looked at the television side and selected Kennedy as the clear winner.
I think we can do better
because he looked the part.
The talent
and
of
then those that listened to radio picked Nixon because the gravitas, the deeper voice, the mastery of the details. And so Each of these rewards different things. And then therefore, we have to structure our organizations to optimize what it rewards. Broadcast rewards branding and image and charisma. And so the golden age of advertising was during this broadcast era. And as soon as it got broken up with digital technology, it's been struggling, and ad dollars have been dropping from advertising firms ever since. So you create a model to optimize a particular time or technology. And so this is why we say there's a social technology underneath that we should understand. And now that we're moving into distributed, so what does the internet do well? It distributes knowledge. It distributes contribution. So we see things like Wikipedia or Linux or Apache, these volunteer efforts of distributed capabilities where you can get value from one person making one edit. And so how do we leverage getting value from somebody distributed? So coming into the office definitely works against that. In the distributed internet world, you don't care if someone's 15 years old or 75 years old, which, for me, that's going to be young soon. but it's value. So it's true meritocracy. In the print world, it's hierarchy, it's command and control, it's, FaceTime, getting FaceTime with executives. It's all of those things. So the way companies need to look at how do we adapt is look at positive outliers. Who is living in this world? Who are the natives that are doing things radically differently, and how are they structured? So GitLab is a good example, right? GitLab is a total distributed company. It's not huge, but some of the things they've done, when you come into an office, there's a lot of assumed behavior, assumed norms, because it's proximity. Proximity is culture. But in the distributed world, you define norms. So GitLab has this playbook on all the things you need to know to function well with others. And then you need to put together the technology that supports that.
AI is something that's completely new, or new for most of us, maybe. How does that fit in? What's that new behavior that is going to emerge from that? And, what's going to become AI if that's going to be doing most of the work, and then what remains human?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so AI rewards what? AI rewards somebody who knows what they're doing and can partner with this intelligence to streamline it, expedite it, to challenge. Someone who's very good at, if I've got like a keynote and I'll go through and record my keynote, I'll go through and do a rough record of going through all the slides and ask it to clean it up. And then I'll ask it to punch holes in my presentation. Where does it not flow? What are the transitions I need to make? So I'm partnering. What it doesn't reward is somebody who's a novice to all of this, who doesn't have the experience of being on stage and knowing how it all looks, or an architect who doesn't have the repetitions that they need to get, that they can only get in projects and looking at specs and reviewing products. And you need time to get that expertise. Now what's happening is the friction is gone and all that. The learning is gone. So the tacit knowledge is being stripped out of the equation. So that's the real challenge, is this rewards people like me who can do the work of now 3 or 4 people, because I know what it should look like and I've got the reps and the experience. And what I'm recommending for my son who's graduating from college in this, recognizing that, with electrical engineering, that these young people who are doing very repetitious kind of rote work, grunt work, companies are going to be saying, we don't need as many of those people. So now it's, how do you partner with ChatGPT to give you the curriculum? You need a new training model. So let ChatGPT help you learn new capacities, learn the people skills, learn the politics side of things. So, these people need to use this technology to help them go back into how to learn and partner and get critical thinking and learn how to be creative and learn communication skills. all the things we've been criticizing this last generation that grew up with social media of not having, the ability to have a conversation or to have conflict or to collaborate. So now we need to leverage this and make up the skills. And so there's a school in Austin called Alpha. So this is a good blend of how do we use the technology and use the old standards. So instead of the teachers getting up in front of the classroom with the whiteboard or whatever it is and doing the traditional print-based lecture, expert in the front, you absorb, take a test. What they're doing now is they're doing what's called baseline testing. So they want to know where all the students are in their developmental path. And there's certain developmental hurdles that if you're not reading at a third grade level at third grade, then it's hard to build you don't have the foundation to build the other kinds of learning capacities. The saying is that we learn to read so that we can read to learn. So if you don't have that foundation, the same, it's fifth grade in math. So if a student is struggling, they'll go back through and see at what grade level are they actually reading, at what grade level do they actually have math. They'll go back and develop a curriculum with AI to build that foundation. And then the teacher is the guide helping them to do that. So they've shown that that a student can make up 2 to 3 years of deficit in about 30 to 60 days with this kind of model. So this is a hybrid model where the teachers are not the subject matter experts, so to speak. They're the navigators through creating the right learning experience for students, and it's accelerating their learning. More importantly, they're getting the right foundation. So somebody doesn't go through school like I did and said, I just can't do calculus. I just can't. Well, what they would have done with me is going back and say, well, where did I miss the bridge from math to algebra to calculus, and go back and build that foundation so that I could go forward. So it's totally transformational, but it's a complete different social structure, complete different environment of learning, like a lab. It's more like a learning lab than it is traditional classroom. So we've got to go back and look at, my goodness, we can really help people gain the skills they need, but they're going to need a live person, but they're not the expert. They're the guide and the coach. And it's different relationship, different approach to it, hybrid approach, different facilities to facilitate it.
So I'm interested because I think your fourth place concept kind of reframes the way that we think about office, think about work, think
completely.
about how people and technology all interact. So describe your fourth place so we understand,
Right.
Well,
let's go back to the problem. The problem is we have to be continually learning, right? Things are changing so much. The fourth place concept, let's first talk about the third place. The third place was described by Robert Putnam in the book Bowling Alone in, I think, 1989 is when he wrote the book. And it's that place you go in between work and home where everybody knows your name. It's the TV series Cheers, for those old enough to remember that. Or it's Starbucks branded themselves as the third place. Now, the fourth place, I started thinking about it 15 years ago when, first of all, a book called The Long Tail came out. And The Long Tail is the economics of the internet. So the difference would be like Blockbuster versus Netflix, or Barnes & Noble versus Amazon. In Blockbuster and in Barnes & Noble, there's limited shelf space. And so for that reason, you can only put the books that will sell the best, or the movies, the blockbusters in there because of limited shelf space. In a virtual environment, it's an unlimited shelf space. So what you find with the long tail is that the value is not in the top sellers. The value is that you've got all these movies and things that people will buy occasionally, but it adds up over time to be more value in the low part of the tail than that front part of the tail. So now the question is this: what's the long tail in the company? Well, the managers are the bottleneck, right? The managers and the leaders are the bottleneck to knowledge. And people throughout the organization have all kinds of expertise, but it's hidden. Nobody knows what it is. So yours is competitive sailing, right? And there's leadership lessons in all of that. Maybe somebody went to Italy, or somebody knows mine is writing a book. I've written, 6 books now, 7. And so somebody who wants to write a book, I can certainly help them get there. But if you're in a company, where do you go? Oh, here's where a couple things came together for me. In the early days, Kinko's was an incredible place to go because you could go there and get help, and somebody help you put a PowerPoint together, or a workshop, or whatever it is, and had all the equipment there to do that. In the early days of the Apple Genius Bar, you could get, for $99 a year, you could get 1 hour a week, one-on-one with an Apple Genius on anything you wanted. So in those early days, I'd buy 2 memberships. So I was there twice a week, first name basis. And I was starting my business, and my Mindshift logo came from there. And learning how to podcast came from working with these geniuses who not just told me the specific things about Apple, but shared their genius knowledge. So the way that worked was a marketplace software, supply and demand. On the supply side, there's expertise and calendar slots, times in the calendar. The demand side is, I want to learn this. I'll go through the inventory. Oh, someone can help me create a business plan. So I'm going to top that, look at the calendar slots. And then the physical part is go to the Genius Bar. And so now in a company, we've got people who know how to do podcasts, who know how to do PowerPoints, who are polished in doing presentations, who know the safety manual in and out, all of these things. We've got all this knowledge that nobody knows about in a company. And then if you create a place for them to go that has the third place elements of their social connection, it's got the Genius Bar, where not just somebody officially from the company, but someone like yourself who, maybe somebody's doing their 30th anniversary and they want to go to Italy and they don't know what to do. Well, you've got that in the inventory list because you've got an unlimited inventory. All you have to do is search. And then if you wanted to add stars, the last 4 people that worked with this person who went to Italy gave that person 5 stars. So I'm going to go to that person instead of this person who's got 3 stars. So you've got all these elements you can play with in there, and you bring them together, and you're adding this element of, let's say you've got podcast booth, you've got production capabilities. So you've got printing capabilities and podcast capabilities, recording capabilities, all of this in a neat location. And then I come and you spend time with me. So we're also building social capital. We've got some common interest and common affinity. We're starting to discover people. Remember the app Meetup, so this is a mashup of Meetup and Genius Bar and Starbucks and Kinko's and Amazon. All of these things bring us together to build something, to create something together, to learn something that I couldn't learn on my own, or I wouldn't know how to do it. Companies are trying to figure out, how do we get people to want to come in? Well, if I knew that I could surprise my wife with an incredible trip to wherever, Italy, and really do it right and come in on a Friday, the day that nobody wants to come in, because Friday is 4th place day, and come in and we spend time and we talk about it. You share some stories. You give me the roadmap and the guide and all this stuff. I'm a hero coming home. But maybe I've got to give a presentation in front of the executive team, and I've never done that before. So I want to do it right. So I look through the people who are top rated at doing professional business plan presentations, or maybe I want to put a business plan together for next year, or figure a way to do reviews for my employees, because this is always stressful and I don't know how to do it well, and I don't feel like they come across great. We've created this continuous learning hub that is not just about knowledge or training, but it's about social connection. It's about that third place side of it. So yeah, that's the fourth place.
No, well, that sounds incredibly exciting. And, it's like a place that I'd like to go to hang out. What I'm thinking is this some place that fits inside of a corporation, or is it a community based thing where anybody can walk in and participate, like a library?
Yes, yes, and both. Yeah, think of repurposing libraries and having this supply side, demand side where somebody wants to write a resume and the library has this area broken out, and you go on the website and I've got time, let's say I've got time Thursday at 10 o'clock. So I put down that I'm available Thursday, 10 o'clock, and resumes are my jam. I just love doing resumes, which I don't, but I'm not sure I've done one in 30 years. But anyway, let's say that's the case. And well, I've got a friend doing that for people, and he's finding creative ways because now resumes are so AI driven. You're looking at trying to game the AI system with certain prompts and words that get through the AI filter so you can get done. Well, he's come up with a brilliant model, and he's worked with my kids on it. Go on LinkedIn and find the companies you actually want to work for and do some research on those. Find somebody you can connect with and then begin direct messaging them on, hey, I want to learn more about the company and what do you think about it and what's it like working there, that kind of stuff. And then if I wanted to work here, who could I send my resume to? And it's a different kind of resume he develops. And then they get the name, they get the address, he gets it ready, and then he overnights it to that person, bypassing all the AI filters and noise.
Wow.
Wouldn't it be great to know somebody like that and get some time with somebody like that? Now, I can do it because, he's on my board for Genius Spark and River Rose. So I can tap it for my kids, but wouldn't it be neat in a company for somebody to be able to do that and have that kind of expertise and impact?
Yeah, that would be awesome. We're more digitally connected now than ever. And I'm thinking about the social and the emotional aspect that we go through. There's a lot of mental health aspects that we're dealing with at work. So I'm wondering, how do we design an environment? Can the fourth place accommodate that and enable us to be healthier in these environments?
Yeah, so it certainly can help. Gallup says that having what's called a best friend at work is one of the key predictors of someone retaining that person in the company. So that social connection is vital. I've got a presentation that I just gave it a week or so ago for a large banking company on post-traumatic growth, the 6 elements of post-traumatic growth. And we know through the Harvard longevity study that having friends is key. We know from blue zones that blue zones are those zones across the world that were studied that you have a higher percentage of people living past 100 years of age. Loma Linda is one of those in the United States. One of the keys is the social connection that you have. We know you need at least 5 people in your world that you could call at any time outside your family, that you could call at any time, that would not only be there to help you and encourage you, but also will speak truth to you. Just say, hey, look, get over being so self-absorbed with this issue here. That's not your best self. I expect better from you type. But the statistics say that we have less than 1.5 people in that circle. So yes, we have a loneliness crisis. We have an addiction crisis on media, social media. The dopamine hits that we get from likes or social medias or those reels and those shorts and all that. Those are killing us. They're killing our brains, and they're setting us up for these quick hit expectations that things should be easy to do. And AI is not making it any better in terms of lowering the threshold of having to actually do research and learn something.
Well, you mentioned having a friend that would speak truth to you. And I think one of the challenges our society is dealing with right now is trying to understand massive amounts of information we're confronted with. So how does AI help us to know what's real, what's not real, and where we can find the truth?
That's a great question, because we do know that AI is designed to want to tell you what you want to hear. It's designed to predict the next piece of the conversation. So you have to be pretty good at having it do the counter argument for you.
Or the chat GPT starts out by complimenting me on my question every time.
Yeah, I know. I just say, yeah, enough with that. Or can you send this to my wife and have her say that? So yes, so we do have a problem with this that we have to learn. And so getting diverse information, I'm finishing up Jimmy Wales's book on the 7 principles of trust and how Wikipedia has built in this cross-reference community of validating topics and information and things like that. So in a community where you've got this psychological safety and the ability, like on a good project team, a good project team is a team that can bring up the uncomfortable topics because they might impact the job, or I may not be able to produce what I said I was going to do. So in most projects, I'm just going to keep it quiet and hope somebody else has a bigger problem. But in a good project team, I could bring that to the table. And instead of getting thrown under the bus, we would rally together to help me solve my lead time issue or my cost issue or whatever it is.
Well, I think a lot of what you're talking about is really kind of culture driven, and I think most of that culture we absorb through proximity and observing people's behaviors and overhearing conversations. How do we build that culture now in a hybrid world where we've got a
Yep.
distributed workforce?
Well, so there needs to be a rhythm of one of the reasons we created the ranch here is that there's a place you can come together. So think of it like family reunions, right? You come together as a family, and because of the ties you have and the common experience and all of that, then you can be away for a year and still have good relationships. So you have to have relational foundation in order to have the virtual ties. And a person by the name of Ivan Illich back in the 30s developed this concept called convivial tools. So if my mom calls at dinner time, that's not an intrusion. And because of the relationship we have, that actually connects us together. But if a marketing person calls during dinner and I have no relationship, it's an intrusion. So during the pandemic, and I was working with a lot of project teams, the project teams that had the face-to-face foundation, partnering, alignment, conditions of satisfaction, the behavior norms that we expect that did that before the pandemic did fine or better during the pandemic. Those who tried to start projects virtually, it was a struggle, and it will be a struggle. So that's where we have to come up with a rhythm that, I think Salesforce bought this retreat facility so that they could establish cohorts that are connected with one another and to support their distributed work model. There has to be, it just can't all be distributed, I don't believe, to build strong cohesion, alignment, behavior norms, all the things that you want. There has to be some time together and storytelling and transfer of history and things like that you just can't do virtually.
Well, it's almost like you have to build those common experiences that we all have the benefit
Right.
of.
Yeah. So I think companies will do more, and we've seen more places like mine that are not too far off the beaten path where you can get away for a few days, spend quality time. And I know you've been out here and you know what the difference is in
That's been
coming
great.
together.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you've got connections with those people that'll last, that you can call up, and you've got social capital in the bank, so to speak, that you can draw upon when you need to.
The fourth place sounds like an incredibly exciting environment. And I would think that, it's one of those places where lots of collisions and lots of ideas kind of come together. And I think it's a place where it would spur innovation. But in my mind, I think innovation has always come out of different ideas, diversity, people with different backgrounds and experiences that bring that together. So I'm wondering, how can the fourth place support that and build on that in order to be successful?
Yeah, that's a great question. The mind shift model that you've participated in is a forum. When we brought people together to talk about the future of work last year, diverse, we had a private capital person, we had a co-working person, with people from We had neurodiversity represented in the room. We had technology. We had architecture. And so there is a process of trying to get your arms around what we call wicked problems or complexity by bringing those diverse people together and letting it collide, facilitated collisions on how things work. And things are more complex. And we do need forums to have these kinds of discussions because our tendency, we're not wired to understand either logarithmic or exponential change, and we're not wired to see systems and complexity. So we get stuck in a lot of ways, and the only way to get unstuck is to bring those different vantage points, experience points of the system together in one room and then begin to map it out. Just describe it. What's the experience from your seat on the bus, and begin mapping that out until you see a pattern emerge. And then once you see the pattern or the nature of the system emerge, then you can begin to do something with it. But that's part of the problem, that we're not getting that systemic view, and we can't get it abstractly. I can't get it on my own. I can only get it when I'm in a room of people who are experiencing the same impacts of the system and going through, what's your vantage point? What's your vantage point? What's your vantage point? The very first time I did that, we were dealing with the friction, conflict, and waste in construction. And we were in the Gensler offices in Houston, and we had Turner Construction, the American Institute of Architects, GSA, Hayworth, Gensler, a couple of engineering firms, a couple developers, all in one room together. And so this is what you need to expect. We had butcher paper with all the verticals of each of the stakeholders. And the question was asked, well, what's the problem from your seat on the bus? And Turner Construction, top executive, said, if only the damn architect could deliver the drawings, we wouldn't have these problems. And then the architect said, well, if only the contractor knew how to read the plans and understood design intent, we wouldn't have these problems. And then someone said, well, if only the owner, meaning GSA, if only they could make up their mind and wouldn't change on a monthly basis, we wouldn't have these problems. And then if only the contracts by the AIA were in English and weren't weighted to favor the architect, we wouldn't have these problems. And then if only the developer wouldn't sandbag their budget, their real number, so that we're playing a game. And so we're going through all this. And my thought was, okay, this is pretty typical and nothing's going to come out of it. But because we were mapping it, all of this, someone looked up and said, we're all expressing or experiencing similar pain. And then someone else said, yes, the system is designed, the system causes good people to do bad things. We said, well, what does that mean? Well, means we track that up to, well, when the bid goes up, everybody plays one game, which is to try to be the low price game. And then when they win it, then the game shifts. And so we were talking about the dynamic. What we eventually landed on is the system is designed to create distrust, silos, and conflict and waste. It's designed to do that. So now the question is, okay, what would a trust-based system and is anybody doing it? That was the birth of the process that we call mind shift, to try to break through these things that keep us stuck. So whether it's engagement or whether it's return to office or whatever it is, these problems that won't go away, you've got to bring them together and begin to map out what are all the drivers in here and begin to see that there is a pattern underneath it all. And if we name the pattern and understand the dynamic of it, then we can begin to flip the question and say, well, what would it look like for people to want to come into work? And how would we do that? And is anybody doing it?
Well, you've got me thinking, because I think that's the precise problem that we're struggling with in the work environment today. We've had COVID or kicked everybody out of the office. And I think that's part of what inspired me to have these kinds of conversations, because I feel like the workplace has become so complex that no single individual or organization can really execute it. There's so many things like technology, sustainability, health, and well-being now that all have to be considered. So where does somebody begin in that process? And now we have AI, which is a whole nother level that we have to deal with. So what's that look like as we move forward, creating these new work environments?
One of the challenges is nobody wants to make a mistake.
And nobody's
Amanda,
willing to take a risk. I think that's the
well,
other.
yeah, and Amanda Snyder's research at Think Lab said that 80% of leaders or decision makers either want solid data or a competitor to make the first move. Well, we're in a world that just doesn't exist. There is no solid data on anything we're doing. We're all making it up as we go. We're like Lewis and Clark, who come to the Rocky Mountains, and we didn't expect the Rocky Mountains. And now we got to figure out, okay, instead of canoeing, we've got to take 70-foot canoes that are over 1,000 pounds, over 14,000-foot mountains in winter. We've not trained to do that. So the first step is you can do it as an individual, because I did it as an individual in the early 2000s with bringing everybody to Gensler to start this. I wasn't any expert or anything on this. So find people equally frustrated with the same things you're frustrated in. Now, that's number one. Get together and have what we call a collection of the curious. Now, you don't want to have a moaning session, complaining and moaning session, but you do want to identify what the system feels like at different pieces in the organization. We tell a story of this, I think chapter 14 in Healthy Workplace Nudge, of somebody that was in a company that didn't really recognize health and well-being as a priority. And they started with a conversation group, and then they recruited an executive in to see what they were doing. And then they did some explorations, and they did some pilots, and then they changed the whole direction of the company through a grassroots area. But the same principle applies. You've got to get people the people who have the problem have to be the people who solve the problem. And this is where leadership like you and I coming in, I can't come in as the expert, and that's usually my advantage. I'm the least knowledgeable person about the problem that you're experiencing, which gives me a huge advantage. My job is to design the kinds of conversations where people can get to the heart of the issue, which is what I did last week with that construction group. And so leadership has to change from trying to be the answer solver of all problems and don't worry here and this is what we're going to do, to let's figure out how we do this together, whether it's on a team level, department level, organization level, even industry level.
So let me bring it back to your fourth place. And if an organization, wants to move forward with that, create this immersive, high-tech human environment, how do they begin?
Well, so that's a great question. So the conversation is to first understand what a fourth place does or what it can do and the different pieces to it. And then to go on a field trip, to find places that are highly engaging where people are learning and coming together and start putting the mosaic together and pilot. Then you pilot it. And it doesn't have to be an expensive pilot. You could do it if you've got a really cool cafeteria, you could use that as a experimental fourth place, or you could use a swing space or something where you can begin to bring some of those elements together and experiment. Years ago, when I visited Zappos, they had pretty close to a fourth place. They had a Genius Bar, they had a great food area, and they had these kind of learning opportunities. But the Genius Bar was more around the technology and the processes and things like, how to get things done within the company.
Well, they also had great employee art that they displayed throughout the entire facility.
Right. Yeah. So that's what you would do. You would go to some place that's breaking the rules and getting great results to inspire you to take pieces of it back and then begin to pilot it. When CBRE was doing their headquarters and breaking the mold back in 2014, and you visited that place, their process was interesting. The president said, I don't have the answers, but we will find them together. And they had 7 study action groups that comprised about 25% of the total employee base there. It's 250 people in the office. And the architectural firm they struggled with because they were trying to come in with the expert solutions. And what they did is they went on field trips. They went to Bloomberg. They went to Eneco in Amsterdam. went to Google and they went to the Russell 2000 and they said, we're not Google. And they were impressed with the energy at Bloomberg, where Michael Bloomberg was out in the open, no screens, no cubicles, kind of a hub kind of feel. They were impressed with Eneco, with their atrium and kind of the third place that they had there that was really awesome with a barista. So they looked at all these and they would come back, and on Fridays, each of the study action groups would report out, this is what we've learned about furniture. This is what we've learned about technology. This is what we've learned about wellness. This is what we've learned about amenities. And then they prototyped for about 8 months before they landed on, which was surprising to everybody. The goal was to go from 70% private offices to 30%. And Bob, you remember what they had? One private office for the CFO. And you asked him, well, what's the ROI? He said smiles, the happiness of people. Yep. And so this is the CFO saying that. And so it wasn't the solution or the final product. It was the process of discovery together. And that's the world we're in. And he was willing to take a risk to trust that if we structure this right and get people researching these elements together, and we keep bringing back what we're learning, and we're learning together, we're building alignment, we'll test it. That is the process of going forward.
So then are we at the beginning of a new era, where technology can help us become more human and more connected, or does AI make us less important?
Yes, to both. So Clay Shirky talks about, the printing press was so revolutionary, disrupting kingdoms and empires and the church and all of that. There was 150 years of revolution until the Treaty of Westphalia, the first government based on an idea, a constitution. And then he talked about the digital technology that he estimates about 50 years of global upheaval. And what we're experiencing makes nation states obsolete, right? Where's the boundaries? How do you govern? It makes the process of creating laws so cumbersome, that print-based approach and the time cycle. Meta was just let go of antitrust. We should have made that decision 3 years ago, not, it started 5 years ago, and now it's being decided and the world has changed so much. It's kind of like, we forgot why we were doing this in the first place and the rules have changed. The speed of print does not keep up with the speed of AI. And yet our government and everything we do in our education structure is built on the speed of print and the cumbersomeness of print. Print can handle complicated things. It can't handle complexity. And complexity are when things are interdependent with each other. And think about how we learn. We didn't learn algebra alongside of chemistry, alongside with history. We learn them as separate things, but they're not separate. And so it's coming back together again, and we need new structures of organizations and new facilities. What's the root word of facility? To facilitate. We're applying old thinking to new technology and new world realities, and we wonder why we're stuck, and we wonder why we've got these tensions. We need some curiosity, we need some adventure, and we need to release the knowledge base that's in an organization.
So you've got me thinking, and now the last question that I'll ask you is, given what you just described, what's the workplace of the future 10, 15 years look like? Because what you described is something that's very different.
There'll be legacy companies that survive, but look at, the average lifespan of an S&P 500 company is less than 12 years. So we can expect more of that, even maybe to accelerate. We can begin to see billion-dollar corporations with a handful of people. When you can get valuable input from a distributed network of individuals like Linux software, look at what coding capabilities are. We're going to see all of the production kind of white-collar work, just like we saw farmers, tractors replacing horses and plows. We're going to see this AI stuff really revolutionize the administrative side of work. The McKinseys of the world, the Bains of the world. I can go online now and find all of the best Bain proposals and recommendations, and knowledge is not going to be the value. Experience, wisdom, culture, these are the things that are going to have more value than being an expert expert on anything because the shelf life of knowing something disappears tomorrow.
Rex, this has been a great conversation, and I want to ask you, what did we miss? But I know that's a whole nother hour conversation behind that. You
Probably.
always stretch my mind in these conversations. I really appreciate you taking the time to have this, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I appreciate the opportunity, just what you're doing to provoke these kinds of conversations. And the challenge is in our industry, the events that we go to don't give us the opportunity to have these conversations because they're tied to an old model with an old funding business model structure where the people that get to speak are a sponsor or it's for CEU credits. And I think that in our industry, we need to disrupt the trade association model so that we can bring people together to have these conversations. There are forums that allow that, but right now we're still captive speaking on the surface of things.
Well, and I feel like there's so many disciplines we have to consider in the way that we put these environments together. It's very hard and very expensive to do that. So hopefully these conversations force people to understand and prioritize what they need to, given their cultures and the businesses and the things that they're involved with.
Yep, you bet. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Bob, and for the forum that you've created.